Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, آفاق في تاريخ العراق, or Horizons in Iraqi History. I'm Thabit Abdullah from York University in Toronto. The history of relations between Iraq and Iran have been tenuous and quite contradictory, to say the least. At times, these two regions have been part of the same political entities, as occurred, for example, in antiquity under the Achaemenids, the Parthians, the Sasanians, and then even during the medieval period under Islamic caliphal rule. But also, the two regions have had a lot of tension and conflict. This was especially evident during the 16th and between the 16th and 18th centuries. And of course, more recently during the terrible Iran-Iraq war, which I shall have a special episode on that for sure. But by the second half of the 19th century, Iran under Qajar rule seemed to have taken a different approach toward Ottoman-controlled Iraq. This was especially evident after the Treaty of Erzurum in 1823. After that, we no longer see major clashes of armies over Iraq. This does not mean, however, that the competition between the two empires focusing on the area of Iraq ended. It rather took on a different form. What complicated matters even more during the later 19th century is now the entry of European powers, especially the British, in this competition over the land of Iraq. It seems that the methods of this competition shifted from direct warfare to other forms of attempts at hegemonic control. So this is a very interesting period, and a period that has a lot of lessons in terms of modern superpower utilization of methods other than military to try and achieve hegemonic control. And to help us understand this period a little bit better, I'm quite delighted to have with us Dr. Zeinab Azarbadegan, who's a recent graduate from Columbia University. Dr. Azarbadegan is a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at Oxford University currently. I believe you'll start a full tenure track position at Yale University later, though. Her first monograph, Knowledge Empires, Science and Sovereignty in Ottoman Iraq, which she's working on currently, will explore the utilization of scientific knowledge in the inter-imperial contestations over 19th century Ottoman Iraq. And the main contestants, of course, are the Ottomans and the Iranians here. Her PhD dissertation received the inaugural dissertation award of the title of the award is the Howard and Natalie Shawn Prize for the best dissertation in political history since 1800. She's done a number of articles already and a couple of contributions. She's just starting out, of course, and I really look forward to her book. But her articles have already appeared in a number of journals, including Philological Encounters, Journal of Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association. You have a couple in that, I believe, and the Jerusalem Quarterly. She's also contributed to an edited volume entitled Russian Arab Worlds, a documentary history, which I've never heard of before, and it sounds really fascinating. So welcome, Dr. Zeinab.
Thank you so much, Seb, for having me.
You're very welcome. So let's start with a very general, question. Can you just explain to us who the Qajars were, and especially how were they different from their predecessors? I mean, we know that Iran in the early modern period achieved, its great fame under the Safavids. And after the collapse of the Safavids in 1722, there was a period of real chaos, with Nader Shah and then the Zands, Karim Khan Zand. Eventually, the Qajars were able to achieve control and unification of Iran, but they seem to have inaugurated a different type of rule. Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, thank you for that. So basically, every dynasty or every ruler which have come after the Safavids, after the collapse of the Safavids in 1722, wanted to basically, they considered themselves as inheritors of the Safavids. And it's the same with the Qajars. The Qajars were basically a Turkic tribe within Iran. They were one of the contestants during the Zand period. They were basically a very important tribe contesting Karim Khan Zand's rule after Nader Shah dies. And basically what they managed to do, what Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar, who is the first ruler, the Qajar ruler, manages to do, he manages to militarily basically kind of reconquer most of the Safavid lands. And then because he's so ruthless, he's actually killed by his own commanders. But the person who actually makes the dynasty is the second ruler, is the second Qajar ruler, is Fath Ali Shah Qajar, who is the nephew of Agha Muhammad Khan, because Agha Muhammad Khan couldn't have any children. Karim
He
Khan
was a
Zand
eunuch,
had made
wasn't
sure of
he?
that. He was a eunuch. Karim Khan made him a eunuch because he was so afraid of the Qajar power, actually. So they made sure that he wouldn't be able to have children, but he escapes prison and basically then takes revenge from the Zand family. But basically what happens, what Fath Ali Shah does, which is different from the Safavids, he adds to the way that the Safavids ruled. And the way he does this, so the way that the Safavids ruled, and if you look at all early modern empires, that's how they rule, because you cannot project your power outside of basically the capital too much. You don't have the technology, right? You don't have telegrams. It takes forever for information to come, for armies to be sent. So the way that you rule is through local rulers. And so you have a basically, and these can happen in different ways. The way that the Safavids did it was through having local rulers, administrators, which were from the local families of sort of the provinces, Iranian provinces. And what the Qajars start doing, they add to this. So they keep that system, but on top of it, they add a prince, because Fath Ali Shah had many children, hundreds of children, sons especially. So by the time he actually comes into power, he has adult sons who are fighting actually on his behalf all across Iran to keep what Agha Muhammad Khan had conquered in place. But actually what he does, he basically puts them as, so you have a prince ruler, you have a Qajar prince ruler, and you have the local ruler, and they have to collaborate with each other. And these princes have immense power to the point that they actually have kind of parallel courts wherever they are ruling from, to the court in Tehran that Fath Ali Shah holds. And the two most famous ones are Abbas Mirza, who is in Tabriz, and Muhammad Ali Mirza Dolat Shah, who is in Kermanshah, who has his eye on Baghdad, actually. And these princes are, both of them are military commanders. They actually make their name as such. And they rule parallel courts to and they are actually almost the same age. And one of the other issues that the Qajars have, and the Ottomans have too, they keep having it, but the Qajars and the Safavids do as well. This is basically one of the issues that all post-Mongol dynasties across Eurasia have, is the question of succession. Because if you go by the old sort of rules, which come from the Persianate kingship or even Byzantine one, the eldest son would become the next ruler. So the succession, the line of succession is very clear. A ruler dies, their eldest son becomes the next ruler. The Mongol succession rules are different. If a ruler dies, then the next best male would become the successor. And this creates chaos all across these dynasties as soon as a ruler dies. And a lot of basically internal conflicts that you have in these empires is because of this issue of succession, which almost remains unresolved for most of their histories.
But
And the Qajars, yes,
sorry,
please.
And I will get to Iraq very, very quickly soon.
Yes.
But I just wanted to ask, despite this, however, despite this issue of succession, many of these empires seem to have lasted quite long and done quite well. So it seems like they sort of accommodated themselves to it in many ways.
Yeah, and I think this is I think one of the biases of nationalist historiography or even Orientalist historiography is the idea that a centralized state is a strong state.
Yeah.
Is an enduring state. But these states, these empires are decentralized. And one of the reasons for their endurance is this decentralization.
Absolutely.
Because you have continuity at the local level, but you have discontinuity or ruptures at the central level, right?
Yeah.
And that keeps them actually afloat for much longer.
So then this comes to another question I just want to ask you about the Qajars, because it's it's something that interests me. The historiography is dominated by the view that the Qajar period was a period of decline. The Qajars were really very corrupt, mismanaged the affairs in Iran, and that is why Iran then became prey to foreign dominance, especially Russia and Britain. You seem to have a different view to this, though.
Yeah, I think we need to figure, first of all, there are reasons why the historiography is written in this way. A lot of it has to do with, there are two basically strands of historiography. One is the European Orientalist historiography, and the other is a Iranian nationalist historiography, which actually adapts the European Orientalist historiography. And in this historiography, the idea of basically a golden age and decline of civilizations is basically the way that you understand how a system functions. And it's also very much concerned. It's a very strange thing, because the way that the Europeans understood the way that Oriental sort of rulers were supposed to be ruling, it was that they were despots, right? Absolute despots. But when you see the actuality of what is happening, you have this incredible decentralized rule. Then, so they're like, oh, so they're falling from their golden age, right? Because the golden age is described as the times when you have like very strong absolute rulers at the top of the basically as the monarch in these dynasties, right? And the Qajars never managed to fully produce one. Maybe Fath Ali Shah to some extent, but he actually loses wars to Russia, so not really, right? And so they never actually, so they are in a constant, basically, the state of decline because they rule in a very decentralized manner, right? And it doesn't match the ideas of basically despotic Oriental ruler because there is no absolute rule. It's actually very much a shared situation of rulership. And one of the reasons that sort of the nationalist historiography also deals with Qajar history like this is because of territorial losses Iran had during at the beginning of 19th century up to basically its middle.
So if I
Right?
understand you correctly, then you're saying that uh, despite the weakness of the central state, the Qajars seem to have proven themselves very adept at maintaining their empire through a system of an extremely decentralized system. And in that sense, one can view it as quite successful rather than an empire that's constantly in crisis. Is this correct?
I think it depends like how you define success. I
Yeah.
think the Qajars were incredibly success at keeping the territorial integrity of their empire after 53.
Yeah.
And they do that through several methods. One, which in Iranian historiography is called the balance of powers. We call it the Great Game.
Yes.
But the truth is that Iranian state actually has incredible agency in balancing the Russian and British threats in order to keep the territorial integrity of the country.
And some might say the current regime is still doing the same thing. So now let's get to Iraq.
Yes.
How did the Qajars view Iraq, and why was it so important to them that they seem to have, I read a couple of the articles that you sent me. They seem to have placed an enormous amount of energy into Iraq. So how did they view it, and why was it so important to them?
So I think the easiest way to call this is that Iranians for a very long time, especially the Qajars, consider Iraq as an extension of Iran, as part of Iran, which is under Ottoman rule. And the Ottoman rule is an unjust rule. And they have several reasons or interests in this space. Usually people think that the reason or the interest is religious, right? Especially for the South. That's a minor interest, I would argue, actually.
Really?
The major interest is civilizational and historical. The historical one comes from the fact that they consider basically Iraq as part of the Safavid domains that they need to restore. And you see that with every ruler which came after the Safavids. Nader Shah invades Baghdad, so does Karim Khanzat, right? Any ruler which has managed to basically quash the civil war in Iran also invades Baghdad or
But
attempts to do it.
sorry,
Yes.
Dr. Zeinab, I mean, is it possible, really, that they would invest such? I'm not just talking about the Qajars now, even the Safavids, that they would invest so heavily, make such incredible sacrifices, just because of a vision that this is supposed to be historically part of Iran. There must be some economic, material, social, reason that really has pushed Iran to continuously attempt to establish some sort of hegemony over Iraq.
Definitely, because there are, as I was saying, like there are other reasons, there are several reasons. So
Yeah.
one of the things in 19th century, for example, is that from the time that we have numbers, 1% of Iranian population goes to pilgrimage to Iraq. Not just to go to Iraq, to the shrine cities in Iraq, but it's the main passage for Iranians to actually go to Hajj. Iranians do not use the boats as much. Like most of the population actually goes through the land route,
Yeah.
And there are no like there are no new technologies there, right?
Yeah.
There is no railway to Mecca from Baghdad at this time. So this is one of the main things. And it's not just the sort of the movement of people, it's also merchants, right? There's incredible, like Baghdad is one of Iran's gateways to the rest of the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire, and Europe. So you have this massive flow of people and goods and also dead people into sort of this space. That makes it incredibly important for Iran to actually keep this space as sort of to understand this space as its own. And it's not just that people are moving, people are residing in Iraq, right? One of the things that sort of scholars write, for example, about the Karbala massacre in 1840, sorry, the dates.
1843 was?
Yes, I think 1843 is that Karbala, one of the reasons the Ottomans want to break the autonomy of Karbala is because it's kind of ruled by Iranians, right? There are Iranian gangs and there are Iranian ulama. So there is like incredible number of people, elite, who are residing in Iraq and have incredible influence in what happens in Iran. And you can see this with every social movement which have happened, socio-political movement, which has happened, which is important in Iranian history, with the tobacco movement. The fatwa is issued by a member of ulama in Samarra. The constitutional movement, it's the ulama of Najaf and Karbala who have to basically, it is the ulama of Tehran, but ulama of Najaf and Karbala also are supporting the movement. And then the breakdown of the constitutional revolution becomes as a result of basically the infighting between different groups of ulama. One of the reasons for its
For
breakdown.
example, we do not see with Iran's attitude toward the Caucasus. I mean, the Caucasus arguably could also be studied as historically part of the Iranian sphere of influence, or historically part of the great empires of Iran, like the Sassanians and even the Safavids. And yet Iran did not put as much of an emphasis in trying to re-control or extend its hegemony over the coast as it did with Iraq. Iraq seems to have always been such an essential part of Iran's view of its position regionally.
Yeah, and I would argue that's because of the civilizational narrative, right? You do see also incredible economic and social activity with the Caucasus.
Yes.
But the difference with Iraq is that in Persian literature, since the Ilkhanids, like since the Mongols, Iraq is seen, and this basically harks back to a much older tradition, which would be Sasanian. Iraq is the heart of Iran. This is like an exact phrase from Nuzhat al-Qulub, which is the main book that is a geographical book, and it's the first book at the end of the Ilkhanid period, which defines the realms of Iran, and it starts with Iraq, and it calls Iraq the heart of Iran, and the center of basically Iran. And this is a
Sorry,
civilizational narrative.
as
Yes.
an Iraqi listening to this, it kind of creates shivers up my back, but it's perfectly understandable, of course. So let's get now then to the methods of influences, and this is really the heart of your research, isn't it?
Yes.
And your work. Um, what kind of methods did the Qajars employ to try and establish some sort of hegemony over Iraq? And what was the Ottoman reaction to this?
So I look at a period of peace, right?
Yeah.
Relative peace between the Ottoman center and the Iranian center. You do have wars happening in this region, but they're not coming from national armies, right? There are rebellions, and we can go over what actually happens. But at that period, it starts from 1831 with Ottoman reconquest of Iraq, like all of Iraq, and uh, ends with 1905, when the Ottomans actually conquer western parts of Iran, when the Iranian central state is very weak during the Constitutional Revolution.
Yeah.
And so this is the period that I look at. And what you see is a shift to diplomacy and to new modes of claiming a space in this emerging international system, which is through production of scientific knowledge. And it's is scientific. Like, it has a claim to the positivist scientific understanding of objectivity and being factual, right? And so what I discuss is one of the main ways that both the Ottomans and Iranians start basically dealing with Iraq after 1831 is to produce immense amount of knowledge about the space. And they do this through cartography, so map making, basically, through photographing the space, so making it visually known, and also through archaeological excavations and writing about ancient history of the region, and also writing, like incorporating the history, like writing new histories of Iraq, which are written, excuse me, writing new histories of Iraq, which are written according to a civilizational narrative, the new European civilizational narrative, with the tripartite periodization of like ancient golden age, the middle the middle dark ages, and the new modernizing age, right? They start writing these histories where, if the Ottomans are writing it, the Ottomans are the modernizers, but if the Qajars are writing it, they are the modernizers, right? So, and they put the ancient, and they define the ancient and the dark Middle Ages differently in the way
So
that
can
they
you give
write the
us some
histories of the region.
specific examples of how do the Ottomans attempt to legitimize, let's say, their civilizational role in Iraq and their control over Iraq versus the Iranian? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so what I use for this is basically the Baghdad Salname from 1882. So Salnames, Ottoman Salnames, provincial Salnames, are very special sources. People who work on the Ottoman Empire use them extensively. What they give us is they give us a lot of information about trade,
Oh,
about
can
who
you
was.
just very briefly say what is
Yes.
a Salna?
So a Salname is basically what is published annually. It's a published piece of work, so it's printed annually by the provincial government, giving basically information, summarized. It's an encyclopedia of the province,
Right.
right? And the encyclopedic knowledge is about the administration, economy, uh, also about the environment and history of the province, right? And I look at one Salname, there's a specific reason I look at this one. I look at the Salname which was published in 1882. And what happens with this Salname, it's special because it actually gets republished in Istanbul, in a series of newspaper sort of articles. And then it is in the same year, it is translated in the Qajar court by the main Ottoman translator, and is gifted to the governor of basically Isfahan and Kermanshah, who is ruling the borderlands with Iraq. So it's the historical details of the Salname, which we might consider as being just a standard, and it's not, is basically makes this like move and is edited and sort of translated in through this process that it goes through, basically from Baghdad to Istanbul to Tehran to Isfahan.
Okay, and how does that serve the purpose of imperial justification?
So it's about sort of what is the content and how is it basically changes and edited. The content is very interesting because what is happening in Salame is the Ottomans actually clearly they have in the previous Salames they have talked about these tripartite periodization. So we know very clearly that they subscribe to this idea of to write a modern scientific history, you have to write in a way that you would subscribe to this tripartite periodization. And what's interesting about the way that the Ottomans write this at this moment in 1882 is that we would consider the golden age of civilization in Iraq as the Abbasid period, right? The Ottomans do not agree. So it's actually the Abbasid period is written as a period of corruption and destruction. They actually name, like if you read the part that they've written about the Abbasids, first of all, the Abbasid Caliphate doesn't even appear in the set of rulers that the Ottomans claim to be descendants of.
The Ottoman.
Yeah. And this has nothing to do with Iran at this moment. It actually has to do with the fact that Egypt is occupied by Britain and they are making alternative claims to caliphate. And they're making it through a formulation of Abbasid history, right? The alternative claim is the idea that if we go by the Abbasid history, then there is the idea of descent, right? You have to be a descendant of the Prophet to be able to be a caliph. And this is how the Abbasid revolution came to be, because the Umayyads, who were previous to the Abbasids, did not have descendants from the Prophet or the Prophet's tribe, the Al-Hashim. And basically, the Brits are saying the Ottomans do not have that as well. So they cannot claim the caliphate with a continuous line from the Abbasids because they are not basically playing by the rules. And one of the Ottoman, and this is 1882, this is the time of Abdul Hamid II. He has an immense claim to the caliphate. He's actually repurposed it for his pan-Islamic policies. So the Ottomans actually start de-emphasizing the Abbasid history of the caliphate and succession, right? At this specific moment, and they do it until almost until 1892. So if you look at the Salames which have been published in Baghdad every year, until 1892, the Abbasids do not appear, or if they appear, they are a moment of destruction and corruption. So when they write history, there are like at least 2.5 pages about the Abbasid rule, which goes through all the rulers, and 21 times they use the word destruction. So it is a part of the actually dark Middle Ages for the Ottomans at this very specific time, right? It has very specific political reasons for them to write this history in this way. And the Dark Middle Ages continues until the Ottoman centralized rule over Iraq. And the way that they write history, that every time Ottoman centralized rule is not exercised, for example, during the Mamluk period that your scholarship covers, that's also a period of destruction. And the way that they are writing this history is to legitimize and justify their military reconquest of Iraq. Right? And that, which is very new, like people still remember, right? This happened in 1831. People are still alive. They're still writing about it. They remember which was very violent, right?
So what do they view as the ancient golden period?
So the ancient golden ages, they accept the Babylon, Nineveh, like all of these, they accept that. But for them, mostly is actually the period of the four caliphs, the four rightly guided caliphs, right? And they do have a claim to also Sasanian, because they do consider themselves Shahanshahs. And Shahanshah is a title which comes through the Sasanians to the Islamic world, right? They have that claim as well. So
how do then the Iranian or the Qajar respond to this? How do they view the history of Iraq?
So the way that the Iranians basically do it is very similar to how what we know of the Orientalist histories, of the way that sort of Orientalist histories write history of Iraq, is that the Abbasids were great until they didn't like before their decline, because of their Persian viziers. So the beginning of the Abbasid rule is seen as a continuation of the Sasanian rule. And as soon as that stops, as soon as you have the basically the weakness of the caliphate and the coming of the Seljuks and basically the Turks into this story, then it's in decline, right? So the decline starts from after the great Abbasids, basically right after Harun al-Rashid, right? That's when before that is great because it is a Persian civilization.
Because of the Burma kids and
Exactly. And so I still don't know whether the Orientalists pick this up, like pick this incredible, because it also plays into very racial narratives, right? Where you have a racial hierarchy of who is the most civilized. So if the Greeks are at the top there, then it's the Persians, then it's the Arabs, then it's the Turks, right? So you cannot have civilization making by the Arabs or the Turks, but the Persians are okay. And that's the way that the Orientalists frame this story. And I don't know whether the Qajars are playing into this, or they started it and the Orientalists just picked it up. So, but yeah, I haven't figured
and
this out yet.
the golden age, according to the Iranian narrative, must of course be the Persian period, right? The Sasanian,
Exactly. So
the Achaemenid.
so whenever Persians are ruling over Iraq, the golden period is that ancient period up to Harun al-Rashid, right? From they actually start incorporating Achaemenid history into their own understandings. Achaemenid history is not part of Qajar understanding. They actually adapt it from Europeans in very interesting ways. But up to basically Harun al-Rashid, because it's a Persian sort of influence. And then it's periods of destruction. But whenever you have some level of Iranian influence, then you have rebuilding and civilization. And the moment, and the way that specifically, not if you read Nasser-ad-Din Shah's own writing, and also like the way that sort of the Qajars write histories of Iraq, this is before 1905, right? Almost like mostly actually the height of this is during Nasser-ad-Din Shah's reign for various reasons. It's basically the only good things which come to Iraq are because of presence of Persians, of Ajam, or the king himself, because he travels there. So if there is any prosperity, it's because of presence of the Persians. And
did this, I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but did this kind of intellectual activity, writing encyclopedias or writing histories, or the salnames that present Iraqi history either as being the gift of Persian, genius, or of Ottoman genius. Did this really matter? Did this have an effect on Iranian, say, influence in the land?
Yeah, so the way that it basically it plays out in different ways. And one of the ways we can think about it is the way that the Qajars, and also not only the Qajar Shah himself, but the royal family and then the elite assert some level of power is through what we would consider as one of the most important ways that rulers actually assert power, which is patronage, right? And so, and the way that it works is patronage of spaces like shrines and roads and bridges and caravanserais, but also patronage of specific people. right? And these specific people are usually the ulama, or the Shia ulama in Najaf and Karbala, sometimes in Kazimia as well, like north of Baghdad, at this time, a separate space. And it actually really scares the Ottomans. Like there are documents in the Ottoman sort of archives that you see, like they are actually following where the Iranian money goes.
Well, I've seen some of these. I've seen
Exactly.
some of these documents. Yes.
Because it actually matters, right? It matters what the elite of this, the local elite, who they are loyal to, right? Because if push comes to shove, if something happens, who they're going to support is going to be very important. So patronage is one of the main ways. And what's important about patronage of a space like architecture and roads is that it's visible to everyone, right? So one of the things, for example, Nasser-Eddin Shah does, Nasser-Eddin Shah is the first person who gilds the Dome of Samarra, which is the biggest dome out of all of the shrines in Iraq. So he sends 300 boxes of gold, and basically they gilded that whole dome, which was brought down in 2009. And it's immensely visible. It's visible to everyone. You don't need to be sort of to be able to read the Salname to see who's done that. On top of that, not only that he's done that, actually, if you go to Samarra today, the Qibla gate, right, of the Samarra Shrine has Nasser-Eddin Shah's name on it. It doesn't have the name of the Ottoman Sultan, who is the ruler of the land, but it has Nasser-Eddin Shah's name on it. And to tease the Ottomans, he writes himself as the Ottomans were actually also patronizing Shia ulama. And one of the things, like if we look at the conclusions of this story, it would be basically placed in First World War, right? And what happens during the First World War, the Shia ulama actually write collective fatwas, which is very rare in Shia history, supporting the Ottoman Sultan, Caliph.
Yes.
I don't remember if they actually call him Caliph, but they support the Ottoman Sultan against the British invasion, to the point that young members of the ulama themselves go to the front lines. So the idea of, and this is actually even supported by the constitutional elite in Iran. So there are sources which actually show that the constitutional elite in Iran were supporting the ulama, and they are fighting. And this doesn't start with the First World War. It actually starts after the Young Turk Revolution in Iraq, in Ottoman Empire in 1908. So from 1908, you see immense political engagement of the Shia ulama in Iraq with the Ottoman system. They are writing and publishing in Ottoman newspapers, both Ottoman Turkish and Arabic. And they are issuing fatwas. They issue a fatwa for Libya when the Italians invade Libya and the Ottomans are fighting. They issue, again, collective fatwas saying that we should all fight, basically supporting the Ottoman Sultan. And they consider themselves as leaders of the Muslim community. They don't say Shia, Muslim. So they and so the idea that there is a lot of sort of focus on the ulama, especially after the tobacco movement in 1892, because people realize their immense power in Iranian politics, because because they are separate from the state, right? Which is different from the way that the Sunni ulama function with the Ottoman state. Actually, the Sunni ulama are part of the Ottoman state, right? The Shia ulama are not. They are separate. Whether they are in Iran or in Iraq, they have their own structure, which helps them to stay independent financially and also politically. And you see incredible engagement of Shia ulama with the Ottoman state and supporting the Ottoman Sultan, especially after 1908. So, and the Ottomans are patronizing. So are the British, by the way. So it's a competition between different empires trying to basically because when we talk about the ulama, we think about them as just religious rulers, but they're actually leaders of the community,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because they are scholars, right? They hold immense knowledge, and they also are judges. They
That's the
adjudicate.
important. Yeah, that's the really important.
Right, so they are leaders of the community. They're not just like sitting like in their seminaries and basically espousing religious ruling. They're actually part of the community, and they're leaders of the community, and that's why there is immense interest by all of these empires to basically get their loyalty and get them on
Right,
their side.
right. Now, to wrap it up, you know,
Yes.
I'd like to ask you something. Maybe it's a little bit of an unfair question, because I know this is outside your research. But do you sense a real echo of this, or a continuity of this kind of ideological struggle continuing even today?
To some extent, yes. In other ways, no. So
Mm,
we are not dealing with imperial formations anymore, right? We are
right,
dealing with nation states.
right,
And the way nation states function, in terms of identity, they're very different, right? They try to homogenize uh, sort of very vast, different identities into a single idea of being Iraqi or Iranian, right? And one of the main ways that Iraqi nationalism has functioned is this focus on Arabness and Arabic,
mm,
which has come basically, you have very violent periods of this, especially during Saddam Hussein, when they basically any sort of difference or any espousing of Iranian identity or speaking even Persian basically is tried to be eradicated from Iraqi society.
right,
So, and Saddam is not the first to do this, right? There is an immense intellectual discussion in 1920s in Iraq to basically try to define Iraqi identity, national identity, as separate from the Iranians.
yes,
Um, and I think we talked about this. I found a book which I should have brought up the reference for, but was written in 1921, where an Iraqi historian intellectual tries to mathematically prove that the Iranians did not rule over Iraq for that long.
mm, yeah,
So this is basically is the struggle over Iraq, over what kind of identity, whether it is part of Iran or not,
mm,
is something which actually seeps into the national identity making of Iraq itself, right? And it also continues on the Iranian side. So even during the nationalist period in Iran in 1930s and 40s, um, there is sort of an imagining of Iraq as part of Iran. And that comes in the quote that I have in one of my articles, is that they say, it's really bizarre, but they say Iraq was always part of Iran, and the only reason they speak Arabic was because at some point they were ruled by these Arab caliphs, but they're actually Iranian,
mm,
right? So the way that sort of the bias of that nationalist history functions is that, of course, there are Iranians, and Iranianness a lot of times is defined by speaking Persian. And the only reason they don't speak Persian as one of their main languages is because they were dominated too much by the Arabs, but they're in actuality Iranian, right? So it continues, this struggle continues over sort of the identity on both sides of the border. And you can also see it, you can see some remnants of this struggle in the way that, for example, Iran deals with ancient history of Iraq, right? And artifacts.
mm,
So, for example, with Tisiphone, whenever Iraqi government wants to repair Tisiphone, Iranians are the first ones who are like, oh, we are interested. Please
right,
let us do this. so much because Iranian National Museum is in the image of the Tisafun.
Okay, so
It is, yeah, it's built in the Tariqat slurs. So, or the relic of Iranian nationalism is Cyrus's cylinder. Cyrus's cylinder was discovered in Babylon, in Iraq, in 1871 by Hormuz Rassam, an Iraqi Christian from Mosul.
right.
Right? And it was, if you actually look at the history of the artifact itself, it's not even written by Cyrus. It's written in Babylonian cuneiform by priests of the temple of Marduk, who is the god of Babylon. The only connection it has to Cyrus is because Cyrus is named in it as the ruler who came and took over. That's it. So but that is considered as one of the main relics of Iranian nationalism. Is considered by Iranians, especially after Mohammad Reza Shah, to this day, as basically the Iranian contribution to human rights. Again, Iranian contribution, right? It was not written by anyone anywhere near Iran, right? It was written by Babylonians. And so that struggle is still continues. That struggle over this ancient history is still continues. So you see that, and the struggle over people continues, right? And one of the things over people and over sites. So Iran has immense power right now over the repair and expansion of the shrines in Iraq. And they are very clear about how some parts of it can be or cannot be repaired. I remember when I was in Iraq, I heard a story from one of the people who was involved in sort of in repair of the shrines, and he said the Iraqi government actually wanted to take down the tiles which are there in a Najaf shrine from the Safavid times and retile the inside of the dome. And the Iranians said, if you take it out, we're not going to pay any more money to you to repair the rest of the shrine. So it's very material sort of impact on same sort of spaces, and some of it coming from same ideas or rooted in the same sort of civilizational ideas. Like, there is no claim by the current Iranian government to be inheritors of the Safavid dynasty, but they do actually subscribe to the civilizational narrative, which is part of Iranian nationalist narrative. And they do also have immense interest in religious sites, in the ulama, which are now, and probably even were in 19th century, incredibly intermixed, right? The idea of talking about sort of Arab and Iranian ulama is very difficult because ulama intermarry. And so, yes, there are, and like one of the main sort of examples of this you can see during the Tishreen Revolution, one of the first sites which was burned down was the Iranian consulate in Najaf, because it was seen as a site of Iranian intervention into Iraq. And yes.
No, it's quite interesting and extremely sensitive also.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Zeinab, for this very lovely chat. Hopefully we'll have you on again.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for having me.